In a few days' time, I begin this on the 11th of August 2020, we shall be celebrating our independence. It will have been 73 years since 1947 and about 5,300 since Indus Valley. I read somewhere recently that India might very well be amongst the worst countries in the world to have to live in. And yet, for reasons I shall try to clarify, I appear to continue to want to do so. I write what follows admitting a sufficient amount of luxury in my life. Sufficient to be able, for instance, with rather some effort, to endure my situation as it is at present, yet sufficient also, with somewhat some more effort, to escape it should I like to. Indeed, many of my childhood acquaintances have in fact left. And indeed, I too did once leave, physically, with the intention of not coming back, and even more so philosophically, but returned. I cannot say I like living in India still. I cannot lie. If not daily nowadays, at least once every week, I do despair of my country. I really cannot say anything good in general about the people here, with whom, hard as I try, I haven't at all been able to see eye to eye on anything. My friends from abroad do of course often enough visit, and I do indeed feel lightened somewhat thereby, but really it is rather disheartening to realize that I am living in a country that none of them ever will want to contemplate settling down in. More so that I am living in a country where none of whom who already live where they do seem to have done so out of their own free will, and who will not flee at once if given the slightest of chance. To add serious insult to injury, there's hardly anything really as goes natural scenery here, at least here in Delhi, to recommend or feel compensated by. Though I shan't of course swear eternal allegiance to my present beliefs, I have stressed upon momentary but universal consistency, but never demanded of myself, or of anyone else for that matter, anything at all like permanent or eternal consistency. And I should like, indeed, to keep at least one foot out the door, should circumstances so develop. I should like, nevertheless, to state them. And I should like to do so as succinctly as I can, as any such beliefs in actuality, if considered in all their detail, tomes upon tomes can fill. With the above convenience allowed for, I shan't talk of the future. The law of the jungle having firmly been established, apparently, in modern India as its governing principle, I can only but imagine on bad days for it to be becoming a second-rate, or perhaps hundredth-rate America in years to come. And I'm not quite sure I should like that very much. If I talk of the past, my own past, when first consciously I decided to become an Indian, which was when I was in the UK, I should add, my motives were largely these following: a certain heartbreak, financial difficulties, a growing desire to be hearing my own language about me, a repugnance against visa inequalities growing fiercer by the day, and a resurgence of a particular self-respect in myself, as a result which allowed me no longer to admire riches I had known to have been looted from my very own people. I did not want to feel myself a hypocrite, in short, nor at all a renegade. I could do something about the condition of my own country, I felt. And if knowing so I chose not to, my life was expendable. The people there, indeed, were kinder to me, the air there purer and fresher, the countryside worth its name, but I'd have felt myself all the hollower for having stayed. I submerged myself instead in Gandhi and Tagore, and my country, I felt, was redeemed. I started to feel a meaning to where I was born. Since when, I have had to lose most of my illusions, sadly. The grandeur of Gandhi and Tagore I found nowhere in actuality. Practically, or quantifiably, I have not been able to accomplish anything, moreover. I am yet largely dependent upon my contacts abroad for my finances, and my efforts regarding language and dress have also conclusively proved unsustainable. I haven't had much luck with my neighbors either. As a personal policy, I now only travel to countries which I've either been invited to, or feel otherwise welcome in, which aren't all that many, it turns out. The pollution continues to grow, as does the population. Life, I've had to discover, is cheap here. terrifyingly so. All in all, I've come to lose all faith in governments, whether of nations or indeed of God. Whom I do still have faith in Tagore's words, are those individuals all over the world who think clearly, feel nobly, and act rightly, those channels of moral truth. I don't still feel myself a hypocrite, at least, nor a renegade. I've been able to keep intact that self-respect of mine. I don't know how many people have. Perhaps this really ought to be sufficient to one to continue wanting to live in one's country, distressing as it may be. It doesn't, of course, feel sufficient often enough, on a midsummer afternoon, for instance, in a traffic jam, but there it always is, as a guiding principle. To be fair, of the future too it seems at least this one thing I can say. Of the future perhaps beyond myself. That I do indeed harbour a faint, perhaps misguided, belief that even by my merely continuing to stay here in India, should even I not really be able to do anything about it, and despite how difficult it every day seems, and given especially the knowledge of how else life can be lived, in Scandinavia for example, where were people to characterize their life in one word, they'd perhaps choose coziness, where we on the other hand should have to confess makeshift. I am in part, for now, somehow, fulfilling my role. And indeed, it isn't true that absolutely everyone wants to flee the country. There are Mahatmas treading our soil even today. Practically, again, of course, there have had to be other encouragements as well. The question of why I continue to want to live in India has gradually melded together with that of how I may continue to want to do so. If not thought about constantly, and if lived actually and clearly, life anywhere in fact is possible, is it not? I have had to harden my heart for certain, to begin with. I have had to compromise on my ideas of perfection. I've had to realize that neither can one here go on sympathizing with another, nor antipathizing. One cannot maintain an all-or-nothing philosophy also as regards one's own identity. One must be willing to pick and choose, and be spontaneous at every moment. Poetry has had to be forgone. There feels no room for it. Contrary to worldwide trend, I have had to learn also to care less about the present moment, and care only with the utmost calculation, taking pride instead in the past much more readily, and looking forward as strategically as can be managed towards the future. In fact, the future I now see cannot at all be left out, can it? There are things I should like to have done, milestones I should like to have crossed in life. And given the relative ease with which these can be done and those can be crossed where I was born, by not having to claw or trick my way into somewhere else's citizenship, perhaps the decision boils down to whether one is willing enough to let go of that dim hope for the future, upon consultation with present convenience. Were I pressed still harder for an answer as to why, I should say that because at present I have my home here. A home of my own, which I may decorate as I will, and within which at least I may live as I will, and one for which I need not pay rent. I'm afraid I'm not as entrepreneurial or enterprising to be able to afford anything similar anywhere else anytime soon. At least, for now, my life within my home is entirely my own. I need not submit to regulations I do not recognize. Is it perhaps a desire for control? In the end, I suppose I don't wish to live as anyone's pet. I'd much rather a strayed life, thank you very much. I've been meaning to compile a family history of mine for quite a while now. It occurred to me yesterday, the 19th of August, in connection with the above, that my own ancestors ought also perhaps to be labelled renegades, by the same token. For many a time having moved about, granted within the country itself, but none the less. The labelling would be incorrect, however, wouldn't it? For there is emigration by necessity, and emigration by desire. Out of a certain self-interestedness, I mean. for better prospects, to where one's talents might better be appreciated, for instance, or vice versa, where the power of one's currency begins to feel manifold on account of next to no effort of one's own. To my own knowledge, never has the latter taken place in my family. It is not, of course, a crime to be doing so, to be clear, should the movement resemble that as of perhaps from Italy to Spain, but I don't suppose convenience had as yet been made a goddess before my time. My ancestors did indeed emigrate, every now and again, yet never whither they should have had to face embarrassment about doing so, never whither they should have had to face the indignity of having to apply to be able to do so. They're also a bit like those in marriage, aren't they, these feelings of mine? Of course, I haven't personal experience of the matter, but moving to another country for now does perhaps feel like adultery, and I'm unfortunately not even so short-tempered as to be able to consider a quick divorce. The very same was asked once writer Khushwant Singh I recently discovered. I ought certainly to read more of him. Why am I an Indian? I did not have any choice. I was born one. If the good Lord had consulted me on the subject, I might have chosen a country more affluent, less crowded, less censorious in matters of food and drink, unconcerned with personal equations, and free of religious bigotry. Am I proud of being an Indian? I can't really answer this one. I can scarcely take credit for the achievement of my forefathers, and I have little reason to be proud of what we're doing today. On balance, I would say, no, I am not proud of being an Indian. Why don't you get out and settle in some other country? Once again, I have very little choice. All the countries I might like to live in have restricted quotas for immigrants. Most of them are white and have prejudice against colored people. In any case, I feel more relaxed and at home in India. I dislike many things in my country, mostly the government. I know the government is never the same as the country, but it never stops trying to appear in that garb. This is where I belong, and this is where I intend to live and die. Of course, I like going abroad. Living is easier, wine and food are better, women are more forthcoming. It's more fun. However, I soon get tired of all those things and want to get back to my dung heap and be among my loud-mouthed, sweaty, smelly countrymen. I am like my kinsmen in Africa and England and elsewhere. My head tells me it's better to live abroad. My belly tells me it's more fulfilling to be in foreign. But my heart tells me, get back to India. Each time I return home and drive to the stench of bare-bottomed defecators that line the road through Santa Cruz Airport to the city, I ask myself, breathes there a man with soul so dead, who never to himself had said, this is my own land, my native land? I can scarcely breathe, but I yell, yeah, this is my native land. I don't like it, but I love it. In the final analysis, when the spirit of detachment I shall find strongest within me, perhaps none of the above will matter. Yet then also perhaps I shall have lost the desire for anything else, anywhere else. The funny thing is that the analysis itself, I shall know, would have been patently Indian from the beginning.